You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendent and Leadership Podcast, a proud member of the Podcasserole Network. Hey, hi, Jamie.
Hi, Peter. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Another great day.
Is it still hot?
Another hot day in Cartagena. Do you know, it's an interesting part of conversations with people because everybody says, today's a really hot day. And I say, oh yeah, it is a hot day. And then in my head, I'm screaming, every day is a hot day. I don't understand. It was 93 hot and humid yesterday. It's 93 hot and humid today. I don't know what is different today from yesterday, but it is sort of a common, and I guess people, like wherever you live, conversations about the weather, and typically it's like, yeah, it's been kind of cold or it's been kind of hot. That to me, it's so funny to me. It's like, oh, really hot days these days. Like, okay.
In Missouri, do you think people in Colombia talked about the winter as much as people in Cartagena talk about the heat?
You know, in the winter, people kind of retreat. So you don't really see, I guess when you're at work, they're like, man, it's a cold one. And I guess you know that there's a season, so you're going to get the hot one. I don't know.
I feel like it's the difficulty in winter that makes the conversation about the winter such a thing. Like you're like, oh yeah, you driving's hard. I don't know. You need new tires. I don't know what the hell.
I love Bay Area winter. I know that you travel up to Tahoe, so you do know snow, but that was pretty.
No snow. I do have to shovel snow. But it's an interesting thing. Anyway, it's only marginally interesting. It does make me think though of Christina Kishimoto, who we're about to replay, and she probably had the same experience as in Hawaii. Like,
well, that's a good point. Well, and not only that,
again.
Yeah, she originally is from the Bronx, and then was superintendent in Hartford, and then kept moving out west, and then to Hawaii. And so, to me, her career trajectory, the things that she was doing. Right now she is in the executive director of Voice for Equity, and really works with elevating and lifting up women in leadership. I think the work is so valuable and so important. And I really like this podcast episode because while last week we talked around a smaller district with Casey Hallgren, now we're talking about a massively large district that is really rural when you think about it. You have all these islands, and then you have all these communities that are mostly rural communities for which they have only one superintendent for all of the state of Hawaii. I think I mentioned it when we last talked about this episode, is that AASA gives a Superintendent of the Year award, and they don't do it for Hawaii because she would win every year, right? Because there's only one superintendent. So drum roll, please. Do you think I won this year? Yeah, I think you did. Because
wouldn't it be funny though if she didn't win? There's one year they're like,
that's
right.
You know what? Yeah, exactly. We gave it to
We're not doing it.
Mr. Met. He's not even Hawaiian. How do you know? Let me say this though. Her episode is fantastic because we're just a few years away from the pandemic, and yet it feels so real, particularly when you think about funding, you think about an assault on public education at the federal level, and you think about the kinds of decisions the superintendents have to make right now. And she was kind of going through that as well while trying to be incredibly inclusive in decision-making and really getting close to the legislature only to find them completely unresponsive in terms of the needs of her students. And so her pivoting, her relationship capital, all of these kinds of things really speak to, I think, a pretty interesting episode.
I'm so glad we're replaying this one. This is one of those episodes that I talk about still over and over and over. And when people say, hey, when I tell them I'm doing this podcast with you and they're like, oh, send me an episode so I can check it out. This is one of the ones I send.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Kishimoto. Yeah, because it's really fascinating to me. I just love her story. I love her comment about building networks for the sake of, not for the sake of political gain, but for the sake of safety. And I'm like, oh, that's how it feels to me. Like, that's why I reach out and check in with people. It's for the sake of safety. Like other people know I'm still here. And I know that they're still here.
That is so true. She talks really it's about empowerment. And because, particularly for voices in leadership that are typically omitted, ignored, excluded, sidelined. And so, well, actually, that makes me think of our sponsor, which is kind of an odd sort of segue into them, but IXL is our sponsor. And speaking of empowering students in one's district, you should meet IXL. It's an all-in-one personalized learning platform. It has a comprehensive K through 12 curriculum. It's got real-time diagnostics, and it identifies exactly what students need. So if you're interested, check them out. IXL.com/imperfect. All right, Jamie, what do you say? Let's go into it.
Let's do it. You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I'm Jamie Almanzan.
And I am Peter Stiepelman.
And thank you guys for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Yes, we will.
Something is happening to American education right now.
And it cannot wait.
Across this country, students and their communities are being erased from curriculum, from culture, from policy.
Everything families fought for, everything educators built, under threat.
The federal rollback of civil rights protections in education is not abstract. Students are feeling it today, and these decisions will shape the next generation. The fight for educational justice is not over.
We must come together to build an education that doesn't just include every student,
but honors them,
celebrates them,
their histories, their rights,
our histories, our rights.
And despite everything being challenged right now, we know it's possible when we move together. So let's talk about possibility. I'm Ezekiel Dixon-Roman, director of the Edmund W. Gordon Institute for Advanced Study at Teachers College, Columbia University.
And I'm Sonia Douglas, founding director of the Black Education Research Center, also at Teachers College. Together, we're bringing you 4 conversations that cannot be missed: the politics of possibility.
Each episode, Sonia and I sit down with leading voices from policy, research, and practice.
Researchers like former U.S. NCES Commissioner Peggy Carr.
School leaders like Superintendent Wilmer Chavarria.
Policymakers like former U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona.
And advocates like Angela Glover Blackwell of Policy Link.
Real strategies, real voices.
A clear-eyed path forward.
Education is not lost.
But this moment demands us.
Watch The Politics of Possibility.
Season 1 is available now.
Podcast rule. Welcome in.
Welcome to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendent and Leadership Podcast. I'm Peter Stiepelman, and I am thrilled to be joined by my co-host and co-commenter and good friend, Jamie Almanzan. Now, Jamie, you asked me something recently about friendship, about connections, about relationship, which I think is a really great way for us to start. Because I think you actually asked me about adult relationships, and it reminds me of the John Mulaney line that your father doesn't have friends, your mother has friends, and they have husbands.
What has been your experience with making friends as an adult? Because I have friends. I have a group of 10 guys, they're all men, that I've known basically since elementary school.
Same. I mean, for me, I've had the same friends since nursery school from Temple B'nai Shalom. And we get together every year as a way to reconnect and see each other. We have bagels the next morning. We have kids. We take a big picture together. We play really poorly organized Nerf football. And I have some close friends from college, absolutely. As an adult, it has become more difficult potentially to distinguish in terms of, I have a couple, but really for me, I'm anchored to the ones I've known my whole life. I mean, these are, as my dad once said, you know that they're your friend because if they would ask you for money, you wouldn't think twice and you'd give it to them without question, which maybe is an interesting definition of friendship.
That's fascinating. One of the things that went through my head, I have a few adult friends that I've made as an adult, but those relationships, unlike the elementary school folks, they're more in and out. And they're around, we'll do something, we'll be connected for a little bit, and then we ghost each other for, it feels like months at a time, right? And then I'm like, I haven't heard from so-and-so. I wonder how they're doing. Or actually, to the Mulaney quote, my wife says, well, how's Aaron? I'm like, Aaron, right. That's a person I like. And Dee Dee will ask questions like, how's his son doing at Howard? I'm like, yes, right. His son goes to Howard. That's right. I'm like, I don't know the answer to that. And I should know the answer to that. Let me text Aaron and see how he's doing because it's been too long. I'm using Aaron as an example right now. But one of the things I thought of when we were talking on the phone recently was I am in no position to have less friends. Having less friends doesn't help me because as you get older, it becomes harder and harder to find places to make friends. And then the help that you might need as an older person also gets diminished. I have my wife who is wonderful and will be with me, hopefully, knock on wood, we'll be, what is that? She says in the Notebook, we'll die together holding hands, right?
I'm in trouble because my wife doesn't like to hold hands. I mean, look at that lovely couple. You want to hold hands? Nah.
You're sweaty. Hand is so sweaty.
And I'm like, no, I'm not sweaty. No.
It brings me to a whole other topic of things that I'm super interested in that we should bring up at some point. Do you follow or do you look at anything the Gottman Institute produces on relationships? John Gottman and his wife? Oh, spectacular. Brilliant research out of Washington, I believe, out of UW. I was first introduced through Jim Knight. Jim uses some of the Gottman research on understanding interpersonal dynamics between two people. And some of the research the Gottman Institute talks about is a bid towards, meaning you are looking to engage with someone. A bid away is you are actively choosing to disengage from the person and they know it. The one that was most harmful is the non-bid, basically the complete ignoring of the person's bid toward you. So when a person bids, says, hey, I'd like to talk to you, or I'd like to do a thing with you, whatever, that there's also a state that is active, like I actually don't even respond to you. And so it has more negative impact than the bid away. The bid away is an indicator of positive relationship because at the very least you're saying, I'm interested in engaging with you, just not about that.
Our conversation today has everything to do about relationships. And so I'm going to come back at the end here and ask you a little bit more about how does the Gottman piece fit into my conversation? So let's get to it. Today on An Imperfect Leader, my guest is Dr. Christina Kishimoto. Dr. Kishimoto is the founder and CEO of Voice for Equity and a professor of clinical education at the USC Rossier School of Education. Now, prior to founding Voice for Equity, Christina led education systems in Hartford, Connecticut, Gilbert, Arizona, and most recently in Hawaii, a native South Bronx. She is a bold advocate for social justice and a national leader on educational policy and equity matters. Christina, I am so thrilled to meet you today. Welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thanks, Peter. I love being on this show.
I'm so pleased. It's fair to say, because I've seen your social media posts, and you always wear a Yankees hat. So Yankees fan, I assume.
Just a little bit.
No. A lot of bit. And having grown up outside of Queens, I can tell you, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm a long-suffering Mets fan, it is so hard to watch them just perpetually lose. Although I will tell you, they've had an amazing summer and a fantastic fall. Lindor, MVP. But often it just ends in a terrible situation for me.
It's hard for me to talk about my upbringing without talking about the Yankees. It's just hard. And
it's hard to talk to a Mets fan without rubbing it in their faces.
Yeah, it's that beautiful old stadium that we all miss if we grew up by it. The new one has nothing on the old stadium.
I feel similarly about, even though that Shea Stadium wasn't that beautiful. In fact, it wasn't at all. You can look at Robert Moses because he is responsible for Shea Stadium, which was kind of a...
One of the things that just kind of forms your upbringing in New York, especially during the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s, was that in the old stadium, they would stand outside and they would give out free tickets to kids for the bleacher seats. And so we would just go by, pick up tickets and go sit in the back, right? We could barely see anything from there, but just being there was just amazing.
I love it. Well, I'm thrilled to have you on the podcast. And from the positions that you've held, I found it really interesting how you kept heading west from Connecticut to Arizona to Hawaii. I guess Guam was the only other place you could go west and still remain in the U.S. But each state must have brought these new opportunities, new challenges. And this is a really profound one that I just can never wrap my head around, which is that Hawaii is one single school district. And for those who are listening, to put that into context, Hawaii is more than 10,000 square miles. When you were in Hartford, Connecticut, the entire state is 5,000 square miles. There are 138 school districts in Connecticut, and Hawaii is one. 8 main islands, 137 islands in all, but one school district. For me, when I was in Missouri, I was somewhat overwhelmed by this urban, suburban, and rural district of 300 square miles. And you had 10,000 square miles. So, okay, here's my question. I know this could be an entire podcast episode on Hawaii. So I'll try to sort of confine it to this in terms of navigating that transition. from managing education systems across multiple districts, Connecticut, Arizona, and then Hawaii. What were some of the most, the most notable adjustments that you had to make in terms of leadership approach, resource allocation, and community engagement?
Yeah, so I love this question because I think it's so reflective of who I am. I think my parents wanted to know where I was headed to as I kept going across the country. I am someone who just loves new places, meeting new people, being in new environments. I mean, that's just who I am. And maybe that's part of, growing up Bronx. And so when I started in Hartford, Connecticut, that's a high need, high poverty community. And it's not just the district that's high poverty, high need. The entire city had gone through lots of history of underfunding, not being able to meet the obligations of the city because their real estate dollars are almost non-existent. They rely heavily on the state and on federal dollars. The district relies heavily on the city and the state and federal dollars. And so, we didn't have referendums to raise money. We had no real estate dollars for the school system. So high poverty community during a time when Hartford Public Schools was under a landmark desegregation case, which actually was just sort of settled last year after 30 plus years. So the parents had sued the state for education neglect relative to Hartford Public Schools. So that creates a context that is really unique, really about $425 million of budget. I went from there an all BIPOC community to Gilbert, Arizona. Middle class, large Mormon population, Mormon community with strong political ties, diverse community though, with Chinese and Mexican community members who have been there for generations and generations and have built Gilbert and what it looks like today. But middle class community, very different. You don't say any diversity concepts out publicly. Those are things that are better left unsaid because we are all the same. So very different mindset, different community, $100 million less of a budget for a district that had 15,000 more students. So middle-class community that was underfunding its school system. Very, very different. Then I went to Hawaii, $3.5 billion budget with a B, large budget that gave me lots and lots of flexibility to do a lot of creative things. Because when a need came up, if the legislature didn't fund me, and I was legislative dependent in the state, I could look at my own budget and work with the board and move money around because we were so large, 9th largest district at that time in the United States.
So I'm really interested in that. I mean, because you've really just painted a really interesting picture in terms of how communities are different. And then I think about within the islands that you're representing. And so in this case, in terms of Big Island, Hawaii and Kona versus Hilo, or looking at the north part of Kauai versus south or west near Waimea Canyon. And I've sort of been doing just a little bit of research on Hawaii, so now I feel really prepared for a geography test. But I would say just in terms of just trying to think through how were you able to be visible, an important job for a superintendent? How were you able to meet with community members, particularly a push for Native Hawaiian and culture and curriculum reflecting the very rich communities that are there. The fact that Hawaii has this history of Japanese and Chinese and Filipino. And so I'm just really just trying to wrap my head around what were some of the ways that you engage community, particularly in a state that often feels removed, being geographically isolated, and sometimes being sort of not always in the present mind when you think about Washington, D.C.
Oh my goodness, you just gave me so many questions that I can go so many places.
I know. Just go one direction.
One of the things I will start with is Hartford Public Schools in Connecticut is very close to Washington, D.C. And because we were high need districts, we got a lot of visits from the US DOE. Hawaii is isolated. We got no visits out there from the US DOE. And so it actually created a different set of circumstances that I could lead under. It meant that I often was doing something that was very different than what was happening in what we would call the mainland USA. Because we're so isolated, we can do our own things out there. As long as the legislature and the board and the governor were in alignment and we could move agendas forward. And we had a pretty good budget to work within. And so we could innovate and we can do things very creatively. We also have this rich history of the Native Hawaiian people and the impact they've had on just thought leadership and how we look at the world, a real focus on sustainability, a focus on the Hawaiian cultural values of naho pina'ao. And those values were very much based on this concept of love, which is called aloha, and this concept of place called Hawaii. And so it was a beautiful place to lead in that sense, and being isolated and taking advantage of that and leveraging that, and also having this amazing culture that's not just the Native Hawaiian people, but as you mentioned, Asian communities that were part of that community, and also the Micronesian nations that were so much a part of who Hawaii is as well.
As I have learned more about Voice for Equity, it is clear your moral focus is that despite making up more than 70% of the education workforce, only 27% of school superintendents are female. And so Voice for Equity is focused on improving access to policy leadership opportunities for women superintendents, and then those who are preparing for careers as school superintendents. And so your compelling purpose is really clear: to empower women to narrow that opportunity gap. And you referred to this in your June newsletter as leading with intention. So if one of your goals is to be a resource for women and leaders from non-dominant communities, could you describe how Voice for Equity was conceived, how the network is working to change the system, and what you mean by leading with intention?
So I will say that everything does go back to growing up in the Bronx. I grew up in a very diverse community, lots of languages spoken. There was so much beauty in our culture, and we learned respect for each other's culture, for each other's languages, living and working together because we were in the housing projects, and you have to do that to survive. And it was beautiful. Even though there were hard times in the Bronx, there was just this beauty in that culture, right? And in all those rich languages and how we shared with each other. Outside of that space, as I moved on to other places, college, workforce, the experience was very different. All of a sudden, I was not an insider. I was an outsider. I was constantly reminded that I was a woman, that I was a woman of color, that I was a woman of color that came from poverty and from the Bronx, of all places, which had just this narrative around it. And so there were two driving kind of experiences that I will always point to. Not because I really want to remember one of them, but because there are things that just couch themselves in your soul and drive you. One is being about 22 years old and in my first professional job in Connecticut. So now I'm in a different environment, different culture, and having an executive level, cabinet level person insist on calling me Maria because he couldn't remember my name was Christine. And then explaining in front of people that it was a good guess because I was a Latina girl. Now, here I was in the middle of a competitive, policy master's degree, very interested in equity and policy leadership, 22-year-old with my head in the clouds at such a young age around equity. And here's this man in power in front of people, changing my name and calling me this Latina girl and just minimizing me. And I watched the adults around him on cabinet not take control of this situation. I watched them ignore this. And they ignored it until I lashed out on him one day and said, "You will not call me Maria and you will not address me until you learn my name." And it was an embarrassment for the whole cabinet because these are very important people. And I was just in a small entry-level position. And someone finally took a hold of that position, but I'll never forget that situation. The other was my first superintendency in Hartford.
Before you, I want to hear that, please.
Yes.
And I'm mindful of the fact that I'm interrupting you. I want to first say you said that this individual minimized, this person dehumanized you.
That's right.
And I can think to so many experiences within one's cabinet where everybody is sort of watching, nobody says anything, and then afterwards comes over to you to say, "Oh, how are you doing? Oh, I'm so sorry that this happened," all those kinds of things. And so I imagine as part of the way that you and Voice for Equity is supporting leaders, particularly women and women of color, is to help think through, this is what's happening and here's how you can deal with it. Because
Absolutely.
silence is not the answer.
And Peter, it's unbelievable that I get calls. We're a network of women across the nation. We treat each other with a lot of confidentiality and love and support. Right. And I get calls that sound just like that story and that experience when I was only 22 years old.
So my apologies for interrupting. I felt like I couldn't let that go without really calling out exactly what what I think is what you're saying. It was such a dehumanizing experience.
It was. And after growing up in such a rich environment where there was lots of respect for each other and for differences and for who we are, and not having to deal with these kind of gendered experiences in this kind of very in-your-face way. In Hartford, it was interesting. The board had selected me. I was an internal person that was moving into the superintendency. And I was asked whether I would agree with getting a coach. And I said, sure, absolutely. This is my first superintendency. Even though I'm an internal person, it'd be great to have someone. I've never been in the superintendency. And I was not allowed to select my own coach. In fact, I was assigned a white man who I actually knew and had tremendous, and I still continue to have tremendous respect for, in a neighbor district. Now, remember, Hartford at this time is the second poorest district in the United States and in the second richest or most affluent state in the United States. This is during that time that I was leading. This superintendent that was assigned to me as a coach had been his entire time in a very affluent district, predominantly white, not an urban center. And so I embraced it. But by the time he finished coaching me, he said, I realized the disservice that you did not have a woman of color, someone from an urban area that you selected as your coach. He said, I spent all of my time learning from you instead of supporting you. And I appreciated that we could have that conversation, but that also is a driver for me today, right? That women need to get coached by one, a coach of their selection, man or woman. And also women of color experience something so different on the job that they need to be able to have a network of women, if not a coach that is a woman of color that understands that experience and understands that racialized and gendered context that they often lead within.
If you're just joining us, our guest today is Dr. Christina Kishimoto, the founder and CEO of Voice for Equity. Christina, what does the term an imperfect leader mean to you? How does it resonate for you?
Well, I don't think you need the word imperfect in front of leader, because I think that leadership is messy and it's imperfect. But in its messiness, I think we learn how to embrace differences in people and different opinions and different thought leadership. And we learn how to figure out the hard things together. And I think that's why leadership can never be perfect, right? And so I think that's important to embrace. Now, I will say that in this time period, just the political climate we're in, I think we have moved away from understanding the imperfection of leadership. And we have, I think, too many leaders kind of saying, I'm right, follow me. And we have a little bit of blind followership of what may be the perfect leader. And I think that is really scary for me, because I think leadership should be imperfect and messy. And I think that's where innovation and great thinking happens. I don't think women, and especially women of color, have the luxury to be imperfect, but there is nothing about leadership that's going to be perfect. And,
exactly.
And you see what the outcomes are, right? You see the number of women of color who have been let go from the superintendency in the most embarrassing and disrespectful ways in the last few years, especially post-pandemic. And those are things that Voice for Equity pays a lot of attention to. So we're constantly calling out, reaching women, asking them, how can we help? We're here, let us know, getting them networked, helping others to understand that we have this great leader that's available. So we act as a wind beneath her and support for her as she continues to do the great work on behalf of the students in our nation.
So I want to talk a minute about the Mosaic Project. It is one of our favorite organizations and has over 25 years of experience empowering students to really celebrate differences, communicate assertively, and resolve conflict peacefully at their outdoor school. I happen to have experience being part of the Mosaic Project, and so I can absolutely tell you it's an amazing organization. Their innovative SEL curriculum is now available to our Imperfect Leader audience. And so you can get a 10% discount through their new documentary film-based Mosaic Classroom Project. So just let the people know during your onboarding process to receive that 10% discount is to just mention an Imperfect Leader. Learn more about the Mosaic Project at mosaicproject.org.
When leaders think in systems, they think differently. They see the big picture, making decisions that create coherence and strengthen communication across their teams. They build adaptability, flexibility, and engagement. Every day, school leaders face complex challenges, from student engagement to staff alignment. What if your team could see those challenges as part of a bigger picture? That's what happens when you think in systems. It's how leaders turn complexity into connection and challenges into opportunities for growth. At the Waters Center for Systems Thinking, we help educators and organizations build this capacity, developing the habits and tools that turn vision into action. Think differently, think in systems. Sign up for our webinars, free resources, or a consultation by visiting our website, which you can find in the show notes.
We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. And my guest is Dr. Christina Kishimoto, the founder and CEO of Voice for Equity. In this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they've made, and then we discuss it. So, Dr. Kishimoto, what happened?
Oh, Peter, I have a doozy for you. I have many, though, but this one is a critical one. This was the time of 2020. The pandemic was just hitting us. We're all confused. All of these spaces are being shut down. Schools are shut down. Legislature in Hawaii is also shut down mostly. But now they've received CARES Act dollars. These are emergency dollars given to states. And so the legislature decides that they are going to decide what they're going to do with it. At the same time, the governor was saying, he gets to decide what he's going to do with this. So there's a little bit of political tension and divide already. The Board of Ed, my boss, I'm telling them we need $100 million for devices for students since our schools are shut down and we don't have enough devices across our 7 islands where we have schools. I go to the legislature. They set up a set of hearings. I have a mask on. Legislative building is shut down except me and this group that's having this hearing with me. We have 5 separate hearings over 5 different days. At the end of the 5th day, they say, thank you, superintendent. The Board of Ed is getting $0 for funding, which meant that, Peter, that they already knew that they were giving us $0, at least before the 5th hearing, perhaps before that.
Okay, so typically I ask next, what was overlooked? I have a clarifying question, though. So you've had 5 hearings. They're asking clarifying questions. You're not new to this. You've been in Hartford,
That's
capital
right.
of Connecticut. You've been in Arizona. You've worked with lots of different constituents, and it's not the first time you've met with the legislature in Hawaii. So I imagine you've had some relationships with individuals. You can read body language, people nodding and saying, oh, that makes sense, as you're talking about what your needs are. And then essentially a monumental slap in the face when you hear zero. I mean, it couldn't be more insulting. And so what were some of the things that you were noticing as all of this was happening? It was a complete shock?
Complete shock. 5 very friendly, supportive hearings, unlike typical hearings. I'm assuming, there's just big heart, right? This is a crisis moment for everyone. Everyone's trying to figure this out. I know I need $100 million. We've worked this through. We've put it through the board. We're clear about why we need $100 million. We know exactly how we're going to distribute it. Our plan is so detailed. Body language is supportive. The questions are supportive. They're asking for more information. How will this happen? How will delivery happen? All of this. How will we compete? Because remember, at this point across the nation, everyone's trying to buy devices. And I have a company on standby that's holding $100 million worth of devices. And as soon as the legislature said no dollars, I got a call from that vendor that said, we are giving the devices to the next person on hold. We cannot hold this for you.
Wow.
All of these providers were overwhelmed by orders and they were doing us a favor because remember, you have to pay extra to deliver by ship or by airlines.
Right. You're talking about, right,
Hawaii.
Of course.
We had Hawaiian Airlines on hold in case we needed help from them to distribute across 7 islands. We lost everyone on standby at that point because they couldn't wait for us. There were too many needs.
So what got overlooked?
I think I went in and read with my typical non-crisis eyes and my non-kind of politicized eyes. I knew there were a lot of political dynamics. I was not blind to that. I'd been working with this legislature for 3 years at this point and knew them well and knew the governor well and had good relationships. But what I didn't think was that a crisis like this could be overshadowed by the politics of a second-term governor, of a legislature that had some members who were vying for the governor's seat and were going to be running. I did not think that was going to override or overshadow the fact that we were in a health crisis.
I'm so curious because within any state's budget, education and health are the two largest, unfortunately also prisons. And one of the things that you can be assured of is the constant talk about the importance of education. So here you are trying to get hotspots out to communities, lots of rural communities as well, and trying to make sure that children have access to their technology, not just for education, but also possibly for telehealth, that they could then have contact with their counselor or a healthcare provider. And they're saying, I'm still stuck on zero. I'm sure that you're like, Peter, you're stuck on zero? I'm still trying to figure out zero.
Peter, we had so many people on standby, from those providers who are going to be delivering this to Hawaiian Airlines and the CEO who was on board with us as well, to all of the staff that were needed across islands to receive and distribute, and the team ready to start training up. And at that point, I said, I have all of these people on hold and no work to do because the devices aren't coming in. And starting from zero at that moment, and knowing that here I'm the only one walking down the street at this point. The whole place is shut down to get from my house, which is not very far from the legislature, to the legislative office building. And then having kind of that walk of shame back home going, what happened? And is this on me now? I have all of these kids that need this. How are they going to learn? How do we communicate across 7 islands where not only is Hawaii isolated, but you have each island is isolated from one another?
Right. What did you learn about relationships?
There's 2 things I'll connect. One is I knew, and you just know in these roles after a while, at this point, I'm getting near in my 10th year as a superintendent in terms of experience. I've worked with 3 state legislatures. And so I know when something like this happens and there's so much at stake, you have no choice but to let it go and pivot. And so very quickly brought all the relationships that I did have, from private sector to nonprofits to the military there, all together, met with the governor right away and the board, and we had to pivot and figure something out.
Okay, so the conversation there began, okay, so the legislature is giving us zero. We know that can't be the answer for our children. So we need to come up with
I will not be satisfied with that answer.
Right. So, okay. So I wonder if you don't mind unpacking that a little bit more. So now you have a conversation with the governor. And of course, you've got some pretty big players. If you've got Hawaiian Air and others who are standing ready to support. What happened next?
The governor overrode the legislature and used his veto power to say that, and he adopted most of their allocations, but made some changes. He gave us $30 million instead of the $100 million. I met with the board. We stopped other work temporarily and we moved money internally. And then we had no providers who would provide to Hawaii. And so it was about 6 months before we can get anyone to actually issue a device to us. So in that time period, we worked with for-profits, nonprofits, got a bunch of used devices, distributed what we could. We were able to get hotspots. And so we were able to get some of those out. We did what we could. We took all of our carts that we had, our laptop carts. We had teams volunteer their time. So this is DOE team members who are already stressed about taking care of their families and figuring out pandemic and figuring out how to run schools online. They volunteered their time, helped break down carts, drove through neighborhoods, giving out laptops and whatever we had.
I imagine, you're talking about technology. I imagine also you were doing something very similar. People like to think of Hawaii as a very wealthy place. Certainly those who go on vacation and have vacation homes represent a certain aspect or component of Hawaii. It is also a very underserved state. And so I imagine that distribution of food was really important as well. Did that fall underneath different budgets? Did that fall underneath your $30 million that you were allocated? How did that get figured out?
Yeah, no, we reworked other budgets and we became shelters. We helped the distribution through the military and Pacific Command for health-related items because we have access to families and know where they are. We became a center for social services as well to come through us to help us find families. We never stopped working. And I will say that one of the consequences of pivoting and making sure the work continued is that I will say that by the time I decided I was not going to continue as superintendent at the end of 2021, in August 2021, I was exhausted. I was beyond exhausted. and realized that I was not willing to not be well to continue in a role that had been an amazing role with amazing people. And so I stepped down and I stayed in Hawaii and lived there for a year. And that was the best decision I made. But that was a turning point for just how hard it was to get things done. And yet the educators throughout the state gave just generously and with great humility, and some of them to great cost, because it was a hard political situation.
Right. So when I ask you the question in terms of what did you learn about relationships, and then I, did my telltale interrupting, I would say it seems like a big part of what you learned about relationships is just how incredibly generous the human spirit is, that people really will step up for the children of your state at the time to make sure that they have what they need, and will give, I think, as you said, willingly and to some extent at great cost to them.
Absolutely. I mean, the generosity we saw and the way in which people, in fact, we had to keep checking in with folks and saying to them, are you well? Are you taking time off? We can't keep seeing you volunteer, and do your job. It's too much. And it meant that the cabinet team, we were out about checking in on folks constantly, saying, where were you last? When did you get rest? Where are your kids? Where's your family? How are your parents doing? Hawaii is also a very multi-generational family environment. So you usually have 2-3 generations living together. So how's mom and grandma? How's everyone doing? That was really important to check in.
I bet that sounds very familiar from the Bronx. At least my family growing up
yes.
in Queens and then on Long Island, there was
absolutely.
I grew up in the house that my mother grew up in. So you go to the butcher and it's how's ma, how's grandma. So that sounds very, very familiar. In the end, what was something that was good that came out of this experience?
I think what came out of it was just the way in which people tap into those new ways of thinking about how to do the work. We learned a lot, and we were very creative and innovative. The change in leadership between the governor and the next governor was very respectfully done. That all of that ended up with really good outcomes across the board, not just in education, not just for individuals, but just as a system and as a community. I think that there was a lot of growth and new thinking that came out of that.
What advice do you have for an aspiring leader?
Oh, network. Make sure that you do not ever think that you should do the work alone. There are times when you're forced into a corner and isolated. That does happen. And you need to know that any turn, you can turn to a whole community of other women, especially in my line of work with women and women of color, that there's a whole network of women who stand ready to support one another. I will say, Peter, there are 2 women who just called me to say they got a superintendency. It's their first superintendency. I've known both of them for years. And the first thing I did was say to them, within 5 minutes, you're going to have a person that you're going to call as soon as possible, and you're going to get to know that person, because that person is going to be your first level of support. And you're going to snowball that network you're going to create for yourself. And so we got these women networked with women who were just a year or 2 in the superintendency that understand the newness of this environment right now.
As people want to learn more about Voice for Equity and want to get in touch with you directly or with your team, how's the best way to do that?
Oh, we're so available and accessible, voiceforequity.com. There's a 4 in the middle, the number 4 instead of the FOR. We are at drk@voiceforequity.com. That is my email, and I love networking with people because that is the power that we have in the collective.
My guest today was Dr. Christina Kishimoto, the founder and CEO of Voice for Equity. And Christina, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast. I really felt like the universe was conspiring because I met you through Dr. Porter, and then I sat next to you at a session, and then I really felt that there was no way that you could say no. And of course you could, but I'm so grateful that you didn't. So thank you so much for leading with intention. It is such an important role that you are playing right now in terms of the future of public education. So thank you again.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate the conversation.
We're back following this, incredible interview. And I'm curious, what stood out for you?
Her mindset shifts from the Bronx to Hartford to then Gilbert. And coming from the Bronx, the idea of this woman from the Bronx in Gilbert, Arizona is fascinating. Then you put her in Hawaii. Not only, I also wanted to say to her, your pronunciation, your Hawaiian pronunciation is spectacular. I mean, this is coming from a guy who doesn't speak any native Hawaiian, so who do I know? But Lord, she rattled it off in the beginning.
I know, so impressive. I mean, wasn't she great?
She was great. 22 years old when she left the Bronx, with her college degree to go teach. It just was relatable to me. It's like, I know that experience, except I didn't leave my home. Or like, what was your family's response to that? And, do you have siblings? How did they do? Like, who's still in the Bronx? Anybody?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I remember when we would work with kids in Oakland and first generation kids whose families, they risk everything in some cases to get to the United States. And, the thought of going away to college was like, oh, no. If I'm going to college, they're all coming with me. We're all going. Or I'm not going away. I'm staying close home. Did that sound right?
That happened to my uncle. So the eldest brother, Roberto. So my grandfather went to Stanford and is the, I think, unofficial first Mexican to ever graduate from Stanford University. So then his son goes to Stanford, which also raises a whole other perception about affirmative action. He went to Stanford because of legacy. Also affirmative action. Legacy and affirmative action are the exact same thing. So he goes to Stanford, is failing in the first semester of his freshman year. And instead of moving home, my family, my grandparents and my mom and my other uncle, Martin, moved to Palo Alto because he should live at home and go to school. That's the best way to support him. So he did. He lived at home in Palo Alto and went to university. And this is why I'm raised in Palo Alto and not East Los Angeles.
Yeah, so here she is. She's in her first professional job. The person keeps calling her Maria. And she says, because he couldn't remember my name. And then in front of the people saying, it's a good guess, because you're a Latina. And I can't stop thinking about that experience and what that must have been like and how she continues to have to coach other leaders how to navigate a very similar situation. It's been, 30 years since that happened? You will not call me Maria. She says, you will address me to who I am, right? You will not address me as Maria.
Peter, I think you know this about me, but I'll say it bluntly. Oppression is persistent. Racism in the U.S. is a constant. It's not all the work that people do to eliminate racism or to work on changing racist outcomes is still persistent. That's why when people still go out, I can't believe that still happens. We should say, I can't believe that didn't happen to her when it doesn't happen. That should be the surprise.
So I would say that what I listened to throughout my conversation with Christina Kishimoto is that, here's someone who's deeply committed to the success of others, particularly women of color. And that's because it hasn't ever been a priority for leaders, in particular, to organize networks to provide that level of support. It's just that when I was talking with her and hearing her describe her relationship with the legislature in Hawaii, and that she was taken aback by the fact that she had held all these meetings, she had anticipated a successful resolution to her request, and then, things like that, all of a sudden, the answer was zero. What was your thought about that? Christina's revelation or reaction to the fact that she asked for $100 million for the next year for their support during the pandemic, and she got zero.
The reason why it didn't stay zero is because Christina. She's like, I don't think there's any, at least in my heart, I hope there's no superintendent that would let it be at zero. I believe most superintendents would probably say, well, we can't, that can't be the answer. It's impossible for our children, the people we care for that to be true. But I think because of her skill set, because of her interest in people, that she had, you need to have enough trust with people to be able to burn it every day. And this is because you're going to make mistakes. You're a human being. You're all that stuff. And if I have enough trust with you, Peter, I can say things like, I texted you about the part that made me laugh the loudest was your 10-part question and her calling it out and her saying to you, she goes, that was a lot of questions. I could go in a lot of directions. And you go, pick one. I snorted. I thought it was so funny. I was like, you have like 10 directions in your mind. But you're like, this is so great. What a great example. But for me to text that to you says that I think I have enough trust with Peter to poke fun at the difference, the gap here. He asked 10 questions and then she says, wow, that's a lot. I could go anywhere. And you then immediately say, don't go anywhere. Go one place, which is great. So do I have enough trust with you to be able to point that out in a way that says, I think that's great. I thought it was really amusing. I think it really captures who you are as an interviewer. And I'm not coming from a place of negative criticism. I'm coming from a place of, I think, what a funny moment. If we have enough trust with people, we can burn it. I believe Christina probably had a ton of different people. And she basically called in her markers.
Oh, I totally agree. And what I thought was so interesting was that she was setting it up all along the way. The head of the airlines, whoever the vendor was for the technology devices. I mean, she was calling in her relationships here, and she was cashing in on them. And she had a relationship with the governor and ostensibly a relationship with the legislature. And then it was like, wait. What? If it's okay, I want to circle back to something you said at the beginning of our conversation about the Gottman research out of UW. And would you just kind of take us, bring us back to why you brought that up in the first place, how that sort of stitches into the conversation?
I bring up the Gottman thing partially because of where you live, but also in that I actually think that the thing that she sounds particularly skilled at is having relationships. She seems particularly skilled at and interested, curious about people. And so what that does is when you're curious about people, it makes other people feel seen. And I'll bet you she's done that for a lot of people. And I was so touched by that and thought of it as such an amazing skill.
And I completely agree. All right, we're getting at time. Jamie, is anything coming up in your world?
We're working on our book. We're working on a few different books. And the first book is focused on leadership development or leadership, what we're calling leadership competencies. It's a set of competencies for equity leadership specifically aimed at principals or district leaders. And it's meant to be professional learning that is action oriented. It's all on the job, actual learning.
Hey, that's really exciting. All right, I think we have to conclude. Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falvo created our artwork, a wood print-inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. And I'm proud to be an imperfect leader. I'm Peter Stiepelman.
And I'm Jamie Amansan.
Please join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.